I didn't think walking my dog would turn into the kind of confrontation you usually only hear about in viral stories online. But here we are. It started like any other normal Saturday morning. The sun was barely up, the street was quiet, and I had my German Shepherd, Max, on a leash as we walked through the park. Max is not just any dog, he's a fully trained K-9, one I personally trained myself. I've worked with police dogs, military dogs, and search and rescue teams for over a decade. Max is disciplined, intelligent, and loyal beyond words. He's my partner, not just my pet. As we walked through the park, we passed a few joggers, some early morning dog walkers, and a couple enjoying their coffee on a bench. Nothing out of the ordinary. Max, ever alert, walked calmly beside me, occasionally looking up for commands. That's when I noticed a woman watching us. She wasn't just glancing, she was staring. She nudged the man next to her, and they both started whispering while looking at Max. I didn't think much of it at first. People are often curious about well-trained dogs, especially ones like Max, who walk so perfectly and seem almost too obedient to be real. I nodded politely as we walked by. They smiled back, at least she did. The man gave me a quick glance and went back to sipping his coffee. But about 10 minutes later, I noticed them again. This time, they were walking behind us. It didn't feel like a coincidence. I changed direction and headed toward a different path that circled around the lake. Sure enough, they followed. I decided to stop near the water and let Max sit. He obeyed immediately, sitting calmly by my side as I pretended to take a call. I watched them from the corner of my eye. They stopped too, a few feet away, pretending to look at ducks. Then the woman stepped closer. "He's so well behaved," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "What breed is he?" "German Shepherd," I replied, keeping it short. "He's beautiful." "Is he a rescue?" "No," I said, still keeping my tone polite but firm. "I trained him myself. He's a K-9. Her eyes lit up with interest, and she turned to the man. "See, I told you he had that look." The man came closer and looked Max over like he was inspecting a car he wanted to buy. "How much would you sell him for?" he asked. Bluntly, I was taken aback. "He's not for sale," I replied, not even trying to hide the offense in my tone. "Everything has a price," he said casually. "Not this," I said, standing up. "Have a good day." I tugged gently on Max's leash, and we started walking. I could feel their eyes on my back. My instincts told me this wasn't over. I decided to cut the walk short and head back to my truck. I didn't want any trouble. I'd parked in a quieter area of the lot, and as I approached, I realized they had followed me again. This time, the woman was walking faster, almost running. "Wait, please wait," she shouted. I turned around. Max was alert, ears up, but staying by my side. "I just want to pet him," she said, stepping way too close. "I'd rather you didn't," I said firmly. "He's trained not to accept commands or attention from strangers." She pouted like a child. "You don't have to be rude." "I'm not being rude," I said. "I'm setting a boundary." That didn't sit well with her. The man stepped forward again. "Look," he said, "you clearly know how to train dogs. Just train another one. My wife wants this one. Name your price." I stared at him, stunned by the entitlement. "Are you serious right now? Do you know who I am?" he asked. I didn't care who he was. I told them again. Max was not for sale. He wasn't a product on a shelf. He was a working partner and my closest companion. They didn't like that answer. The woman started yelling. "This is public property. You can't stop me from petting a dog." "Actually, I can," I said. "And if you don't back off, I'll call security." I opened the truck door and gave Max the command to jump in. He obeyed immediately. That seemed to anger the man even more. He stepped closer and said, "You don't deserve a dog like that. People like you never appreciate what they have." I didn't reply. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and drove off. But that wasn't the end. Later that day, I stopped at a store to pick up supplies. Max stayed in the back seat with the windows slightly cracked. I was inside for less than 10 minutes. When I came back, I found a note stuck to my windshield. It read, "Enjoy him while you can." That chilled me to the bone. I looked around but didn't see anyone. I drove straight home, checking my mirrors the whole way. I live on private property with cameras and gates, but I still didn't feel at ease. I reviewed the footage later that night and didn't see anything unusual. The next few days were quiet. I kept a close eye on Max, walked in different parks, and varied my schedule. But on the fourth day, I noticed a car parked near my gate. It was the same model as the one the couple had driven. I couldn't get the plate number, but the feeling in my gut told me it was them. That's when I decided to set up a small camera system in the yard and near the entrance. A week passed, then one night, around 2 a.m., the motion sensor light outside the gate turned on. The camera caught two figures approaching. One held something that looked like food, and the other had a leash. They were trying to call Max, who was inside the house with me. Max barked and stood by the window. I watched the footage live on my phone, heart pounding. I called the police immediately. I didn't go outside, I didn't need a confrontation. The camera caught everything. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes. The couple tried to leave but were stopped. When questioned, they claimed they were lost and looking for their own dog, but the video showed otherwise. They had tried to lure Max, and they had a rope ready. The police warned them and filed a report. I pressed charges for attempted theft and trespassing. Max was fine. But that night shook me. The entitlement, the obsession, the belief that they could simply take what wasn't theirs, it was beyond anything I had dealt with in my years as a trainer. I've worked with dogs under high pressure, dealt with dangerous situations, but this was personal. This wasn't just about Max being valuable or rare. This was about people who thought they could own whatever they wanted, just because they had money or influence. I tightened security at home. I also warned my fellow trainers and handlers. You think these things won't happen to you, until they do. Some people don't see dogs as living, breathing companions. They see them as trophies. Max continues to be my best friend, my protector, and a reminder of why respect and training matter. He didn't bark, attack, or panic during the entire ordeal. He waited, listened, and trusted me. That's the bond I spent years building, and no entitled couple will ever take that away. I didn't hear from the couple again after that night, but I wasn't taking any chances. I upgraded the security system around the house with motion detectors and infrared cameras, added a few more lights to cover blind spots, and even made a quiet call to a few friends in law enforcement. Some of them had encountered similar cases of dog thefts involving trained animals, especially K-9 South or rare breeds. It's more common than you think, and the buyers are usually wealthy people who think the world owes them everything. Over the next week, I changed my walking schedule entirely. Max and I started heading out before dawn, when the roads were still empty. I avoided the usual parks and trails. We went to more secluded areas and places where I knew we wouldn't draw attention. I also made sure to bring my phone, a body cam, and a GPS tracker attached to Max's collar at all times. It might sound extreme, but I wasn't about to take another risk. One morning, while we were walking along a narrow trail outside the city, Max suddenly stopped. His ears twitched and his body went tense. That's something I trained him to do only when he sensed someone nearby or felt a threat. I looked around and noticed movement in the bushes. I stayed calm and gave Max the silent hand signal to stay. From the brush, a man stood up slowly with his hands raised. "Hey, sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you." He was dressed like a jogger, but something was off. His shoes were clean, despite the muddy trail, and his eyes kept darting between me and Max. "Just out for a run?" I asked. He nodded. Yeah, just trying a new route." But he wasn't running. He hadn't even been moving before Max sensed him. I didn't accuse him, but I took mental note of his face and clothes. I ended the walk early and returned home. That same afternoon, I contacted a friend at the local police department and showed him the footage from my body cam. He didn't recognize the man, but he agreed it looked suspicious. A few days later, I received a call from a neighbor who lives 2 properties down. She said someone had come to her gate asking if she knew where the man with the German Shepherd lived. They claimed they had lost their dog and were sure it was the same one. My neighbor didn't give them anything, but she made sure to write down their license plate and told me right away. I gave the number to the police. They ran the plate. It was registered to a rental car. Now I was on edge. Someone was going to great lengths to get to Max, and it wasn't out of admiration or coincidence. I started keeping records of every strange vehicle I saw, every unfamiliar face, every odd movement outside the house. At night, Max started sleeping inside my room, something I hadn't needed before. He seemed more alert to it, like he sensed the tension in me. Then came the night everything nearly escalated. It was around 3 a.m. I woke to Max growling low by the window. Not barking, just a deep, warning growl. I got out of bed, looked outside, and saw someone inside the perimeter of my yard. Not just outside the gate, inside. They were moving slowly, creeping toward the back shed where Max's agility training gear was kept. I immediately called 911 and stayed on the line. Then I slipped quietly out the back with Max beside me, staying. In the shadows, I gave Max a silent signal to stay behind while I got closer. When I was within earshot, I yelled, "You're trespassing. The police are on the way." The figure froze, then he bolted. Max and I chased him to the edge of the yard, but the guy jumped into a car that peeled off into the night. I didn't follow too risky, but the camera at the entrance caught the car clearly this time. The police arrived, took statements, and pulled the new footage. The man was the same one from the jogging trail days earlier. It was all lining up. The officers took things more seriously this time. They opened a formal investigation and assigned a patrol to keep watch near my property. Word started spreading in the local dog training community. Other trainers began checking their own systems and routines. I even held a small seminar at the training center where I teach, warning others about the incident and reminding them how valuable and vulnerable our trained dogs can be. A few weeks passed without incident. Then, out of the blue, I received a letter in the mail. no return address. Inside was a single photo of Max taken from a distance, clearly zoomed in through a lens, and a note that said, "This isn't over." I handed everything over to the police. Again, they were now convinced this was a targeted stalking and potential theft case. They increased surveillance, advised me on additional precautions, and even suggested temporarily relocating Max. I thought about it, but decided against it. Max was safest with me. He was trained to respond, protect, and alert. And most importantly, he trusted me to stay ahead of any future threats. I upgraded again, added pressure alarms, biometric locks, and a few tricks I picked up over the years working with tactical teams. I also began documenting everything, in case it came to legal battles or needed to be shared more publicly. Max remained calm through it all. That was the most amazing part. He didn't seem anxious, didn't act out. His discipline and composure reminded me why I trained dogs in the first place. They're not just pets, they're allies. And in a world full of people who want to take what doesn't belong to them, having an ally like Max meant everything. But I knew deep down this story wasn't finished. Not yet. A few days after receiving the letter with Max's photo, I started getting phone calls from blocked numbers. At first, they were silent. Then, a low voice began whispering threats, telling me I'd regret keeping the dog, that I should enjoy my time with him while I can. I recorded every call and turned them over to the police. They traced a few of the numbers to burner phones and traceable, but it was enough for the police to escalate the investigation. They placed an unmarked patrol car outside my house. For a few nights I appreciated the protection, but I also knew it wasn't a long-term solution. Whoever was after Max wasn't letting this go. I wasn't just dealing with obsessed dog lovers, I was dealing with criminals who saw Max as a prize, an asset they were determined to own. One afternoon, I got a call from a private security specialist I knew through a former military contact. When he heard about what was happening, he offered to help. We installed perimeter drones that could scan for movement, set up silent trip alarms along the back fence, and even disguised a camera inside one of the yard lights. It gave me an extra layer of security and a little more peace of mind. Then, something unexpected happened. I was invited to speak on a local news station about dog training, not related to the incident, just my general work. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want more exposure, but I decided to do it, using the opportunity to talk about dog theft and how valuable working dogs had become. That interview changed everything. The story went viral in the community. Emails poured in from other dog owners and trainers who had faced similar threats. Some had lost their dogs and never got them back. The news started talking about dog trafficking rings and how some of these dogs were being sold for tens of thousands of dollars. The spotlight brought unexpected allies. A retired detective from another city reached out, saying he had dealt with a similar couple years ago. They moved from place to place, targeting trained animals. He sent files, surveillance photos, and incident reports. The faces matched. It was the same couple who had followed me that day in the park. With that information, local authorities launched a more coordinated effort. They found out the couple was using fake names and frequently switching vehicles and rentals. Finally, through collaboration with another state's law enforcement, they tracked them down in a neighboring city. An undercover sting operation was organized. A fellow trainer volunteered to pose as someone selling a highly trained Belgian Malinois. The couple took the bait. They showed up at the meeting spot with fake IDs, a bag full of cash, and an unmarked van with cages in the back. The police moved in and arrested them on the spot. Inside the van, they found evidence linking them to several other attempted thefts across state lines. GPS logs, printed photos, maps, and even a list of dogs and their handlers were recovered. Max's name was on it. When I got the call that they had been arrested, I didn't feel relief immediately. It took a few days to sink in. Even then, I remained cautious. Criminals like them rarely act alone. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I walked Max that evening under the open sky. No more zigzagging routes. No more paranoid glances behind me. He walked beside me, calm and proud. People smiled at us again, and I let myself smile back. Later, I stood at the edge of my porch, looking out across the yard. Max had helped me guard. He didn't just protect me physically, he reminded me of the bond we'd built. The years of training, the moments of trust. Max is more than a dog. He's a guardian, a partner, and a symbol of what can't be bought, stolen, or intimidated. This entire experience taught me that some people will go to unthinkable lengths to take what they want, but it also taught me that preparation, vigilance, and loyalty can go even further. I still check the cameras every night, still keep records, still train Max daily. But now, I share our story to help others. Because sometimes, the quiet man walking his dog in the park is carrying more than just a leash. He's carrying a lifetime of discipline, defense, and love no one can steal. After everything that had happened, life slowly began to return to normal, or at least, a new version of normal. Max and I fell back into a routine. The early morning walks became peaceful again. The tension in my shoulders started to ease, but I never let my guard down completely. I took the time to enhance the training programs I offered at my K-9 school, not just for obedience or agility, but real-world readiness, threat recognition, protective behaviors, escape drills. More people started signing up, having seen our story. They understood now just how dangerous the world could be for dog owners, especially those with specially trained companions. One afternoon, while I was working with a new client and his German Shepherd, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. My pulse quickened for a moment, but then I saw the insignia local law enforcement. An officer I hadn't met before stepped out and introduced himself. He had been transferred to our district and had heard about my story. He asked if I would be willing to consult on a new task force that was being set up to address animal theft and illegal pet trafficking. I said yes immediately. Working with that task force gave me a new sense of purpose. I had turned my ordeal into something proactive. Max came with me on every visit, every seminar, and every field training. He had become a symbol in the community, not just of loyalty, but of resistance, of strength. A few months later, we were invited to speak at a national conference on canine protection. I stood before a large crowd of handlers, trainers, officers, and pet lovers, and I told our story, every part of it. From the park incident to the threats, the break-in, the sting operation, and the aftermath. I didn't sugarcoat anything, and when I brought Max on stage, the room erupted. Cameras flashed, people applauded, and Max just sat there like he always did, calm, composed, aware. Later that evening, a young boy approached me with his mother. He had a small dog on a leash and eyes full of admiration. He said, "I want to train my dog like Max." I knelt down, patted his pup gently, and told him that the first lesson was to love and protect your dog like family. The rest, we could teach. That night, I realized how much had changed, not just for me, but for others who had heard our story. Awareness had spread. People were more cautious, more informed. Communities started organizing local watch groups. For pet safety, dog parks improved their security measures. It wasn't just about one dog anymore. It was a movement. Back home, I added a small plaque by the front gate. It read, "Protected by loyalty." Underneath, Max's paw print. It was a reminder of what we'd been through and what we'd overcome. Of course, life went on. Max grew older. His fur around the muzzle turned silver. His energy dipped a little, but his spirit remained as fierce as ever. We adjusted his routines, gave him more rest, but never stopped training. He would never stop being who he was, a protector. One crisp, fall morning, I sat with Max on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise. A letter arrived in the mail. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was a thank you. A woman from another state wrote to say that after hearing our story, she'd been able to stop a suspicious couple from taking her therapy dog. She used the tactics I had shared online. Her dog was safe because she had been prepared. That was when I knew the full impact of what we had done. Our story had saved others, and it would continue to do so. In the end, I learned that you don't need to wear a badge to be a guardian. You don't need to be famous to make a difference. Sometimes, it just takes one dog, one man, one story. Max is resting now, curled at my feet. He doesn't know how many lives he's touched, but I do, and I'll make sure the world never forgets. After everything that had happened, life slowly began to return to normal, or at least, a new version of normal. Max and I fell back into a routine. The early morning walks became peaceful again. The tension in my shoulders started to ease. But I never let my guard down completely. I took the time to enhance the training programs I offered at my K-9 school, not just for obedience or agility, but real-world readiness, threat recognition, protective behaviors, escape drills. More people started signing up, having seen our story. They understood now just how dangerous the world could be for dog owners, especially those with specially trained companions. One afternoon, while I was working with a new client and his German Shepherd, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. My pulse quickened for a moment, but then I saw the insignia local law enforcement. An officer I hadn't met before stepped out and introduced himself. He had been transferred to our district and had heard about my story. He asked if I would be willing to consult on a new task force that was being set up to address animal theft and illegal pet trafficking. I said yes immediately. Working with that task force gave me a new sense of purpose. I had turned my ordeal into something proactive. Max came with me on every visit, every seminar, and every field training. He had become a symbol in the community, not just of loyalty, but of resistance, of strength. A few months later, we were invited to speak at a national conference on canine protection. I stood before a large crowd of handlers, trainers, officers, and pet lovers, and I told our story, every part of it. From the park incident to the threats, the break-in, the sting operation, and the aftermath. I didn't sugarcoat anything, and when I brought Max on stage, the room erupted. Cameras flashed, people applauded, and Max just sat there like he always did, calm, composed, Aware. Later that evening, a young boy approached me with his mother. He had a small dog on a leash and eyes full of admiration. He said, "I want to train my dog like Max." I knelt down, patted his pup gently, and told him that the first lesson was to love and protect your dog like family. The rest, we could teach. That night, I realized how much had changed, not just for me, but for others who had heard our story. Awareness had spread. People were more cautious, more informed. Communities started organizing local watch groups for pet safety. Dog parks improved their security measures. It wasn't just about one dog anymore. It was a movement. Back home, I added a small plaque by the front gate. It read, "Protected by Loyalty." Underneath, Max's paw print. It was a reminder of what we'd been through and what we'd overcome. Of course, life went on. Max grew older. His fur around the muzzle turned silver. His energy dipped a little, but his spirit remained as fierce as ever. We adjusted his routines, gave him more rest, but never stopped training. He would never stop being who he was, a protector. One crisp fall morning, I sat with Max on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. A letter arrived in the mail. This time, it wasn't a threat, it was a thank you. A woman from another state wrote to say that after hearing our story, she'd been able to stop a suspicious couple from taking her therapy dog. She used the tactics I had shared online. Her dog was safe because she had been prepared. That was when I knew the full impact of what we had done. Our story had saved others, and it would continue to do so. In the end, I learned that you don't need to wear a badge to be a guardian. You don't need to be famous to make a difference. Sometimes, it just takes one dog, one man, one story. Max is resting now, curled at my feet. He doesn't know how many lives he's touched, but I do, and I'll make sure the world never forgets. The following spring, I was invited to Washington, D.C., to speak before a national committee discussing the rise of pet-related crimes. It was surreal being in that room with lawmakers, experts, and activists. I presented a detailed account of our experience, and even brought forward recommendations for better legislation around pet tracking and legal protections for working dogs. It wasn't just about our case anymore. By then, dozens of cases had surfaced with striking similarities. Families separated from their therapy animals, elderly people losing their service dogs, and veterans robbed of companions they relied on daily. Every story had its own pain but also its own power. Max came with me to D.C. He wore a vest that read "Protector." During my speech, he sat by my side, watchful as ever. When I finished, the entire room stood up and clapped. Some even wiped away tears. A senator told me later, "Your story did more than move people, it woke them up." That day marked the beginning of real change. Funding was approved for a national K-9 protection initiative. Pet microchipping policies were revised. Penalties for animal theft were toughened, and Max became a quiet icon featured in articles, school textbooks, and even the occasional documentary. But through it all, he never changed. Max was never interested in fame. He just wanted to work, to protect, and to be with me. His loyalty never wavered. Years later, when Max passed peacefully in his sleep, the entire community mourned with me. They brought flowers, photos, and handwritten letters. The mayor declared a day in his memory, and at our K-9 training school, we built a bronze statue in his honor. It stands there still, a reminder that even in a world full of danger, darkness, and greed, a single dog's loyalty, paired with the will of one determined person, can light the way for countless others. Max may be gone, but his story lives on, and so does his mission.